all we do in this life is grow and change. Like, change is the only constant. So if the foundation of your relationship is you are my other half, you're fucked.
Today on the Hello Haze podcast, I'm joined by writer Haley Jakobson. Haley is the author of Old Enough, a coming-of-age novel that explores queer friendships and relationships, friendship breakups, and what it means to be a survivor. It's an incredible book, and if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend. We talk about it a bunch in this episode, but don't worry, there are no spoilers. Haley also writes an advice series on her Instagram every Wednesday, and I'm a big fan and just had to invite her on the show. In this conversation, we talk about writing and friendship breakups, and we answer a Hello Haze question together at the end about crushes and whether it's okay to fantasize about somebody else when you're in a relationship. If you're not subscribed or following the podcast page yet, please go ahead and do that now. And without further ado, my conversation with Haley Jakobson. Haley Jakobson, welcome to Hello Haze.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited to have you here. I was before this call, I was trying to think of like the moment when I discovered you and your work. And I don't remember the moment, but I have gone back in my email and dating back to like March, I have emails to myself where I was like forwarding Hello Haze advice submissions to my personal account being like, this could be a good one for Haley Jakobson podcast collab. So I've been thinking about doing this with you for months now. And I'm such a huge fan and admirer. And I'm sure we have some overlap, but I really can't wait for like the Hello Haze listeners who don't know your work yet to become I think they'll become lifelong readers. And I'm just so happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. I feel like I really had no idea that you knew who I was, because I think, I don't exist on TikTok the same way that I exist on Instagram. And I like think of you as like being such a force on TikTok. And I, absolutely love your presence there. And I have thought for so long, I'm like, I wonder if like, I just wondered if we would ever connect in that way. And so I just didn't realize that we already like were connected, that you were following me. And it just was so meaningful and exciting.
I mean, I feel the same way. So I was talking recently with someone about like what have been the like really renewable and like good sources of like validation in around putting your work out in the world. And for me, it has been like recognition from other creatives and writers that I admire. Like nothing feels better for me than me being a fan of you and realizing that you know I exist. I'm curious how that has felt for you. You've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, no, I think I feel so similarly. I think for a long time, I felt like I was on the precipice of my career. Like I just felt this sensation of standing on the edge of the cliff and not quite knowing how to get off of it. And I think, really so many things changed for me when I got my book deal. I was so happy with the success that I had for so long, but I really did have this feeling of like, I think more people should know me and I should know more people. And I do a lot of manifesting, but it not in a woo-woo way, in like a very sciencey way. And one of the things on my list that I continue to write is like, I'm so lucky to be in the orbit of powerful people who care like I care. When I manifest, I say statements as if they've already happened. And I really, now looking at the past 2 years of my life, I feel this tremendous relief that I have entered into that stage of life. And so it is absolutely so validating to connect with people who are on a similar path of being known and being known for what they love to do.
When you said that prior to selling your first book, Old Enough, which I absolutely loved, and I'm so excited I can't wait to talk with you about it. When you said that you felt like you were like on, what did you say, on a cliff, and like on the precipice of a cliff about to fall off, and you don't know how to get off, that I felt that in my soul. And I think a lot of people with their work, whether their work is like their passion or it's just something that consumes them in a sometimes stressful way, can feel that. How did you get from feeling like you're on the edge of a cliff and you don't know where to go to this place now where you're more centered or you're less hanging off the cliff?
Yeah, so I think I got there, and I see it as like this sort of two-part event in my life, which was I was very, very busy for most of my 20s, and then COVID hit and I was no longer busy, which really, really scared me. And the reason that scared me is there was a lot of things that I was repressing, and the thing that I was repressing was my obsessive compulsive disorder, which I was not diagnosed with until I had a really great big mental breakdown during the height of the pandemic. And
super fun.
So fun. Lost my mind. And I think for me, in the periods of sort of like grand awakenings in my life, and I can look back and see sort of the largest ones being tied to my mental health, but also tied to coming into identities of mine that scared me, like admitting that I was a survivor and then coming out as queer, as bisexual. And I always know for me that in those moments where I sort of reach the depth of myself, I always come out in a sort of fury of perseverance. And I don't know that I knew that in the sort of thick of my diagnosis, but it really couldn't have gotten any worse than that. And so when I came out of it, I think I had a very refreshed sort of clarity over what was important in my life. And I think the resounding mantra that I had, which it's a little like, it's not that it's silly, it's quite simple, but the mantra that came to me was Haley for Haley, which meant to me that I really just wanted to be the entity of me, and I didn't want to work for anyone anymore, and I didn't want to be sort of just out of the spotlight of my own life. I wanted to be in it, and a big part of that sort of metaphor making sense to me is that I was a photographer for many years, so I was truly behind the lens, and I really wanted to step in front of it. And I just decided that anything that wasn't Haley for Haley wasn't going to work for me. And that's really when I finally got the momentum that I had been craving for so long. And to be clear, I wasn't unhappy and I wasn't suffering. I'm really grateful for the near decade of my life that I just lived in my 20s, pursuing lots of different things that weren't necessarily all career related. I've never lived a linear life of success, and I think that's actually really important to my being, except sometimes I get very frustrated with that part of myself, but it just is the way it is. And so things happened very rapidly for me. And just before that rapid movement was 9 months of writing Old Enough with no promise that anything would be on the other end. But I had nothing left to lose, and writing is like coming home for me. So after a period of like great reckoning with my mental illness, it was very natural that I would sort of step into a project, and that was Old Enough for me.
There's so much to take away from that, what stands out to me is like this ability. And I think everyone might have this ability, though some people may be able to grasp it more easily than others, or maybe they're more practiced in it. But like, you experience something earth-shattering, whether it's external or internal or both, and you're able to like, you're able to use it somehow.
Yeah.
And I feel that way about my life. And but as I read so many advice submissions, and I think if more people can become practiced in that, I don't know, I think it gives some meaning to the great pain, to the great pain.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And I don't think, I always am sort of, wary of being the person that says, make meaning out of all this. Like, for example, I teach writing classes, and just inevitably when people make a choice to invest in themselves as a writer or step into any part of their passion, I think it really stirs things up. So I've had many students go through a breakup during my class, or get fired from their money job, or just have these transitions. But sometimes it's also just quite serious in that, I have students who've had people pass away, or a family member gets sick, and I always have to be really careful that I don't, prescribe this lofty or like esoteric
make art out of it
thing, of make art out of it. But I always invite them to bring whatever they're experiencing into their writing, because I do think to write is to know the parts of yourself that you are keeping secret. And every time I finish the email and I say to myself, I really may have overstepped there. I hope that they see it as an invitation and not a prescription. But I will say that the track record has been pretty good, that time and time again, I see people sort of investing in themselves in an exploration of their pain and their joy. And there's really something to that, I do think for a lot of people, it really does help.
And I think it matters so much to who that invitation is coming from. Coming from you, I think it's received differently than from someone who maybe has not taken the invitation themselves.
Right. Yes, I am coming from experience.
Right. You also said Haley for Haley reminds me of your acknowledgments, where the last line of your beautiful acknowledgments is how you write for 16-year-old Haley. And I read the acknowledgments first, and am a huge fan of book acknowledgments. So I was so happy when I started to read yours, and I think the first line is like that you're such a fan of acknowledgments as well. What do you love about them?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I love earnestness. Like, I'm such a slut for people being earnest. It's such a underrated quality, and I find acknowledgments to be a place where most people, I mean, not every author, some authors keep them really short and sweet, and that's fine. I'm never going to be that cool. I'm just so moved to be, I think acknowledgments is a place where you get a holistic sense of someone's life and all of the things that make it so that they can pursue their passion, and you learn about their community, and it's so honest, and I love it. I mean, when I wrote my acknowledgments, I took like 3 hours, and I sobbed through all of them, and then I had to cut a lot, but I think that you can't write acknowledgments without reflecting on how you came to be where you are, and in that reflection you just find so many parts of your humanity that are the best.
I love that you said that earnestness is underrated. I can't tell you how much I didn't realize that I needed to hear that right now. And I really needed to hear that right now. I think I'm a very earnest person. And I didn't really realize that until I started sharing work with the internet. And I remember somebody once, I mean, we remember, I don't even want to like, I'm going to speak it into existence to give you the example, but I am working on not giving negative stuff the time of day. But somebody once commented on a video, an earnest video of mine, being like, this is the equivalent of Delaney Rowe's satire videos. Do you know Delaney Rowe?
No.
She does these. Okay. And I love Delaney Rowe. I think she's brilliant.
I love them. I love those videos.
But for someone to be like, it made me feel ashamed of my earnestness, and you just like healed a piece of that.
Yeah, well, I think that there's always people who are going to feel that way, and the thing is like, you know, that's what I do these calls with my students, these one-on-one calls that are they're probably, you know, one of my favorite parts of teaching, and time again I get the question of like, how do you get past like the fear of being cringe, and how do you get past that the possibility that someone might see you as overly earnest. And first of all, we're just not everybody's cup of tea, but like I always just think of the evolution of different people and different times in their life, and that same person who feels that way, they might totally change their mind, but they might change their mind in 5 to 10 years. You know, it's not the change usually doesn't happen overnight. So where they've met you in your evolution is like in a stark difference to where they are, and the overlap totally sucks. Like I hate that too, but you know, we get one of these rides, and I don't want to look back and say that I spent it trying to be cool. You know?
Yep. I love it. Okay. Old enough. I absolutely loved your book. I loved your book so much. And I had seen you on the internet say that if you're going through a friendship breakup, this book is for you. And
yes,
the way you created a world around the total mindfuck that is growing up with someone and having that like sisterly type bond that you depict between Izzy and Sav, and then growing up and changing, and the friend no longer fits in your life. And for Hello Hayes listeners who are familiar with the 6 besties theory, it's like there's a real OG bestie, North Star bestie situation going on in Old Enough that I think you guys will, it'll really speak to you. But just the way the way you talk about friendship breakups made me so uncomfortable because of how vivid it was, and how it reminded me of how glad I am to no longer be in a place where I experienced that. But it just got me thinking about like my friendship breakups and what I remember about them. And I'm curious for you, like, what is your memory of friendship breakups you've had now?
Yeah. Well, I've had a lot. I've had very many. And, you know, I find myself saying this a lot. And it is true that my last big friendship breakup was about when I was 25. And it broke me so profoundly that I took a vow of celibacy from best friendship. I just said to myself, like, I cannot continue this pattern. This is truly like so deeply heartbreaking, and something is going wrong here, and I don't know what it is, but I really need to look at this in myself. And I think Old Enough is like a 300-page exploration of what was going wrong and what goes wrong, because then I got to a point where I started talking about friendship breakups online. And I always have this thing, it's happened so many times. I have a deep shame. I say to myself, I'm never going to talk about this, and I'm never going to write about it. I said that about, coming out as gay. I said that about friendship breakups. I said that about being a survivor. I certainly said it about having OCD, especially the sort of taboo themes that I have. And every time I break that promise to myself, because I can't shut up, I can't keep quiet. And every time it is what causes an explosive, rapid momentum in my career and my success. And talking about friendship breakups, I was flooded with messages from people who just were saying, I am so ashamed. Why can't I keep a friend? What is wrong with me? Why can't I get over this heartbreak? Am I always going to feel this loss, this deeply? And it was all questions. It was not, seldom did I hear from anyone who had a relatively healed journey. Yeah. And that really led me to want to investigate why we are so poorly set up to navigate conflict and rupture in close friendships. And I feel like an expert on it now because I've dedicated so much of my life. I feel both like an expert and also I still I have many things that I need to continue to practice as I strengthen the muscle to maintain longevity in my relationships, right? Because it's only been I'm 31. I sort of had this awakening at 25, so I've only got 6 years of practice. But I just realized that what it comes down to is no one set us up for this, and also the glorification of sameness is like a death sentence for friendship.
What do you mean by that?
This idea that we find our other half, that we can finish each other's sentences, that another person knows us better than ourselves. That is a constant affirmation that we are not whole, and that we are dependent on another person to make us whole. And that will come to a screeching halt because all we do in this life is grow and change. Like, change is the only constant. So if your relationship, the foundation of your relationship is you are my other half, you're fucked.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I don't think until I read your book, I had seen it that clearly. Like, it made me reflect because all of the friendships I've had that have ended explosively, like felt like a romantic breakup, put me into a depression, whatever, were friendships that were, you're my missing piece. Like, you're the love of my life type friend. And I only started to feel fulfilled in my friendships when they became more like the dynamic that Sav finds at school with Candy and Vera.
Yeah, me too.
And it just struck me. The way you wrote about it really struck me. And I don't know I haven't really figured out though how to talk about why the dynamic of we finish each other's sentences is problematic in friendship, because it's not problematic in romantic relationships. And I find myself getting kind of stuck when people are like, well, that means that you don't think friendship is as important as love, as romantic love. No,
and that's not the truth at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I believe it is. I mean, and especially, you know, what I'm talking about in Old Enough and when I'm talking about in friendship breakups, I'm talking about femme friendships. I'm not, it's explicitly, and I don't want to say feminine, but it's often the experience with someone else who was conditioned as a woman. Mm-hmm. They might not be anymore. That might have been an identity forced on them. Mm-hmm. But the problem is so steeped in patriarchy, because I find that what's ingrained in us is to actually hate each other. Like, that's the baseline, is that we should hate each other. You know, we are each other's competition. And yet the media has prescribed to us that we are lacking something if we don't find our perfect match in a friendship. And so those two things, like, they really fight against each other, and it's such a binary. But I don't often feel like people want to recognize the first part, because it's kind of yucky to be like, oh yeah, we are bred to hate each other first. And so I don't know, you know, I have so many different thoughts on the subject, and I'm not immune still to feeling like I'm missing something. I see it for me a little bit like an addiction. Like, I will forever mourn that kind of closeness that I could only experience with what I call a twinning relationship. I'm also an only child, so sisterhood has always been something intangible for me, and something that I so deeply crave. But being an only child, I'm so fascinated with sisterly or sibling relationships. And the thing that I glean more than anything is that there's so much conflict in those relationships, so much rupture and so much repair. And the friendships that I'm talking about, and the friendships that, you know, are explored in Old Enough, the ability to have conflict and state differences is just, we just have so few tools to actually be able to do it, because how, if we admit to conflict, then we admit that we are different, right? And if the foundation of the relationship is built on sameness, then what does it mean if we feel differently about each other, or we disagree, or one person is growing in a different direction and we are not, and we're so anxious about it? Those things fester, and that is what I think for me caused the demise of many of my relationships. It was always about the 3-year mark. My North Star relationship is, you know, very, very much what Old Enough is about. It's definitely based on a relationship I had, but then after that, it was like these 3-year stints of unimaginable closeness that felt so good. I mean, it was so,
you feel chosen,
special. Oh yeah, it is. I mean, what a purpose to be someone's other half. I mean, but to me it was like a high, and the low, I just finally decided the low was not worth it.
When you're talking about in sibling relationships, how there's tons of rupture and repair, it brought to mind a memory of when I was wedding dress shopping. And I was with my sister, my mom, my grandma, and my mother-in-law. And I was in the wrong in this story, but my sister was an amazing maid of honor. I got married during COVID, and like, it was a 20-person wedding. Everything kind of went to shit, but it ended up working out. But this was pre-COVID, and we had a long day of looking at dresses, and my sister was either in a bad mood or she really needed to pee, but like, she wasn't being, you know, super present for me.
Yeah.
And we're walking down like 8th Avenue, and I looked at her and I said something like, why can't you put your shit aside for me? And she lost it. She's like, why can't I put my shit aside for you? Like, all I have been doing is being here for you and helping whatever you need. And we had a blow up fight on the street. My mother-in-law, I think probably was, she doesn't have girls, like probably was horrified. And then we like cried and made up and I apologized and I was wrong. But I don't know how that could go down with a friend. Like, like that story could be the end of a friendship, but not the end of a sister relationship.
Absolutely. No, because I imagine that you have had blow-ups with your sister since you were little. And so when you have the evidence that you can repair, there's a foundation of trust. And no one, I mean, I'm sure in some sibling relationships, you might, and probably with twins especially, you might have the pressure of sameness, but I don't think it's the same pressure that a best friend has. And so, that makes a lot of sense. And that's something that, I talk about with my friends now who very honestly have told me, they wish that I could just say I'm mad when I'm mad and not create something very perfectly written and not messy 2 weeks later. It's something that I'm working on. But the reason, and I had this recently with a very close friend where I said to her, I really, really want to do that. I have so much broken trust and I'm really scared. I'm going to start practicing it more with you, but it might take me years to do it. And she was like, okay, cool. But I don't have evidence of repair, or I didn't. I do now. A lot of things have happened in the past 6 years where I have more evidence, but it scares the shit out of me. It is so scary.
I'm having like a emotional, that made me cry. And okay, why did that make me cry? I really, and you're in sharing that story, you're reminding me of, or you're helping me see why I really admire you. I just really admire how you're able to like acknowledge something you're not practiced at and like communicate it and be gentle with yourself about it and say it might take me years and not, I'm not very good at that. And I am really inspired in hearing you like model that.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think, and I don't know if you feel this way, but it's very funny to be the person that someone goes to for advice and then take your own advice. I really do struggle with it because some of the reason that I'm very good at giving advice is because of my ability to intellectualize my feelings. And really the most repair comes from being willing to go to a very, very vulnerable, not manicured place, which is a lot more of a child part of me. And I think what I found over many years of therapy is like the only way that child part of me is going to respond in a way that feels good is if I approach her with gentleness, because fear just inspires non-action and paralysis. So when I have to say, like, I have to have very, very basic, I have to allow myself to have very, very basic emotions when I'm going through a rupture with a friend. Like, I might be able to say things eloquently, that's fine. But if I can't just admit that my feelings are hurt, or I feel sad, or I feel scared, like very basic feelings chart stuff, for those of you who have done the feelings wheel, which I have taped up on my, I have it on my fridge. My partner and I keep it on our fridge. And my partner's a therapist.
I was just going to say.
But yeah, it is this bizarre dissonance of like what I do for my career and then what I actually have to practice on my own. And you know what is really, it just is always just so ironic to me is like what is vulnerable for me is never going to be like sharing my hardships through narrative and story. It's literally just me being messy in front of another person, like not having the story written.
Speaking of being messy, you have been making some videos about like videos from an author about the writing process, and you shared one and
Yes.
I emailed it to you and I was like, I want to talk to you about literally everything you said. And one line is you said that, you know, you're working on your second book and you thought that you were going to be like an Emily Henry writer. And by that, I interpret that to mean like someone who's pumping out books and
churning them out.
And you have been learning about the kind of writer you are. And I would love to just like, what have you learned? What kind of writer are you?
Well, I have definitely learned that I'm not an Emily Henry, which is, you know, it is funny because someone said to me on a recently, I don't know who said it to me, but they were like, you know, I've heard you say this a couple of times now, but it is pretty crazy that like you already are writing another book. But I just don't see it that way because I feel like I finished Old Enough in 2020. So it's been many years, and I started writing it in like, I don't know, 2017. So anyway, it's just funny what other people's perspectives are and like the story that we tell about ourselves. But I guess what I've learned, which is not dissimilar from what I just talked about, is that for me to go to a creative place, I have to go to an earnest place, a vulnerable place, a messy place. I call it like being unzippered. Like I have to unzip my skin suit. And it is again that like duality, which I think is like the lifelong obsession of a Gemini. The duality is that I have a side of me that's able to just be a really dynamic, put together influencer. You know, like I that's a big part of my identity, and she's really on and she's really put together and seems like she has it mostly figured out, and that's not the place that I create from. And that is a tough pill to swallow sometimes because it's like code switching, and it was this tough thing to realize with the second book. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna really have to sort of unbutton the marketing machine that I've been for the past year and a half, and I'm going to have to go back to what I call the mush. And the mush, she's got some really good stuff going on, but she just is not she's not so great at going out in the world and like wearing a suit of real girl armor. Like I have this thing that I often come back to is like, sometimes I just don't feel like a real girl. I feel like, what do my partner and I call it? Like, rodentia. I just feel like this like rat girl, and
like a royal rat.
Like, yeah, like sometimes I just feel really frustrated that I have to access her to be creative. So like, of course I couldn't churn out a second book when I was selling my first book, because I can't create from, because you know, when you're selling and marketing something, at least for me, that I need my suit of armor. I'm not going to go into the world unzippered. I don't feel like that's a value of mine, to be honest. I don't owe anyone my vulnerability in that in that way where I feel like I can be vulnerable is in my writing. That's for me first. That's for me. Then maybe it's for my therapist. Then maybe it's for my community, and then it can be for the public. And I feel good about that. That's my self-care. But the code switch just was not going to work. And so I really had to go totally back to basics. I had to show up in a writing class, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what this book is. I don't feel, I just don't know. It's like uncertainty. And I don't particularly like uncertainty. I don't think anyone does, but OCD, like the sort of kryptonite of OCD is uncertainty. So very hard to, but that's that's the class in the university of my life, which is what my writing mentor, Nancy, always talks about it. One class is patience, and then the other class is tolerance of uncertainty.
I love the idea of like, we should all resort back to basics. Like going back to basics is always available to us, no matter what stage we are in. Like, you wrote your book and then you went back to basics to get started with your second. And like, that is a tool that we can all access. And that is really makes me feel very hopeful.
Yeah, it has to be. It's like a system reset, and like it truly is a tool in my toolbook. So now hopefully that's something I can pull out when I and eventually down the line write my third book, is remembering like, okay, the last time I did this, I seem to have to do a system reset. I don't know for sure that that's how I'm going to be with this process, but let's give it a try kind of feeling. And you know what? Whatever Emily Henry struggles with is not what I struggle with. And what I struggle with is not what Emily Henry struggles with. And that's the thing. And what I always try to do with aspiring writers or people who are, stepping into their identity as a writer is like, they always want to ask about the writing process, which is like really to me, such a boring question, because again, it's just the thing that's so romanticized. Like honestly, it is, I think, my least favorite question, because I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, because I'm always going to change. So of course I have my fun and quirky answers that people want to hear. Like I write on the subway. I write on the subway all the time, but like, is that the totality of my writing process? No, it's ever changing, and that sucks. And no one wants to hear that, because people want something prescriptive.
They
but
do.
One of the worst things you can do is listen to someone else's writing process and then self-flagellate because you can't mimic it. Right? Which is what I was doing with this whole Emily Henry. I don't know how Emily Henry feels.
Oh, totally. It's like my biggest procrastination or like self-sabotage spiral when I am struggling with my writing is to spend like 3 hours Googling how all of my favorite writers write.
Oh my God. No. You can't do that.
And it's terrible.
I know.
But I like trick myself into thinking that it's productive. But it's not.
And the thing is, you might hear a tip sometimes, but you have to think of it as, like I always tell my students, like, think of things as a prompt. Don't think of them as an absolute. Like, give it a try, see if it works. It's all intel. Like, it's just intel, like, and I just say, like, be curious about it. What do you learn from that? That's what I always start my writing classes. Okay, what did you learn about yourself as a writer this past week? And because I just really try to strip them of the black and white and the binary, because it's just funny to try to assign that to something that is a deeply curious exploration. That is what writing is. You don't know what the end is. So, or at least I don't know.
No, I don't either. Can I answer that question? What did you learn about yourself as a writer this week? Okay. Because I feel like I actually had a breakthrough about this, and maybe it will speak to someone else, whether you're a writer or an artist or whatever. I have realized a pattern, which is that whenever I sit down to start a long piece of writing that I'm working on or to work on a project, it takes me at least 40 minutes to even begin to get into the state where I feel like I'm putting putting puzzle pieces together. So what that means to me then is that when I sit down and nothing's happening, I can just say, well, this happened yesterday and it happened the day before. And you did access that puzzle piece thing that you're always looking to feel, but it takes a little time. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to don't be alarmed by this. This is just part of your process.
That's fabulous.
But just like having that, I can't say that it's like completely cured my panic when words don't come. There's like still a little bit of panic every day. But just having that as like, okay, the evidence is that this is normal and you will get there again. So
yes. And I call that creative foreplay. And what I talk about is there's a wonderful book called Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, and she talks about the difference between spontaneous desire and responsive desire in sex. And she talks about how there are some people who sex just comes into their mind and they're ready to go. But the majority of people have responsive desire, which is when you have to invite the idea that you might possibly be interested in having sex. And then you have things that you do to kind of further that invitation. And after a certain amount of time, your body responds to that invitation. And that looks different for everyone. And that's where foreplay comes in. And sometimes that's intellectual, and sometimes that's physical, sometimes that's meditative, or visual or oral, whatever it is, that's your sort of bodily invitation to be ready. And also what that kind of approach is to sex is the opposite of fear-based, because the quickest thing that's going to shut down your desire is having a nervous system that's fried and clenched. That's not going to create any sort of opening, right? And
I'm zipped the fuck up.
Yeah, you zip the fuck up. And I think what you're describing is like you're giving yourself a 40-minute invitation to come to the page. It's responsive desire. And the issue I find with most early days writers is that they think that writing is spontaneous desire. They think it's always the lightning bolt. It's always the surge of inspiration. And yeah, like when you journal, that might be the case, but that there's a profound difference between writing for fun and writing as a career. And very often it starts with twiddling thumbs and boredom and potentially fear and panic. And it's what you do to sort of like lubricate that will get you to a place where you can actually create. And a huge part of it also is the panic and the fear that sucks the creative energy away. Like that's I mean, look, that is some electricity running through the body. You are doing something when you're fearful, right? Like you're up to something, but that's really draining. So it's very hard then to ask ourselves to get creative because we just spent time being scared. Yeah. So that's when we have to have that compassion. Like you were giving yourself yesterday is compassion, or this week rather.
Yeah. Okay. I'm officially calling this creative foreplay. And speaking of, I hope this isn't weird. You wrote such incredible sex scenes.
Oh, thank you. No, that's not weird at all.
You write intimacy so well. And like,
thank you.
I feel like that's like one of the hardest things for writers to do. Like, that's what I hear. It's hard. It was so good. And like, not at all.
Thank you so much.
Cringe isn't the right word because cringe could be used for anything, but it just was like so real. Like, I thought you did such a good job.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think also that's probably all permission to be earnest. Like, if I'm not turning myself on because I'm worried that people are gonna, I always heard that thing of like, oh, the sex scenes are the hardest thing to write. I hate when anyone tells me, prescribes what's gonna be hard for me. I hate that. Like, really, really, I don't like to be told what to do. I hate authority. I hate any of that. And so I think for me, I was just like, but you know, it also, like, I kind of grew up writing erotica. Like, so I think it's just like, I don't know. I have practice. I have some practice.
You grew up writing erotica. I like, can you give me like the,
just for fun, just for fun. Just to sort of turn myself on. Yeah. And I grew up reading erotica because I was too scared to watch porn with my parents in the house. So I would go on literotica.com and I just read like some really like bad sexy stuff and some really good sexy stuff. And it's actually like sometimes in the bad stuff is where you find just like something like really messy and raw and kind of like gross, which is like a turn on, and then in the good stuff you find like the really yummy prose. And so
take both and figure out your way. And well, your practice showed.
Thank you so much. That makes me so happy.
Oh, I'm so glad I said it. Before I was like, am I going to say this or am I not going to say it? And you, with the creative foreplay, just teed me right up. So
well, I think it's all connected. Writing is a bodily practice, so if it's so hard not to talk about sex.
Yeah, totally. Okay. I would love to do a Hello Hayes letter with you.
Okay, great.
So
can't wait.
And so this letter that I picked is about crushes, and I'll read it in a moment. But this was the letter that I had forwarded to myself in March. So I had not yet read Old Enough. And then I read Old Enough, and I'm like, I think I had sent it to myself because you did something on your Wednesday, Haley Help Me Say advice series about crushes. And I think I don't remember what it was, but your answer to it. And then I read this advice submission. I was like, I'd love to talk about crushes with Haley. And then I read your book, and there's lots of fabulous crushes going on in Old Enough.
Yeah, there are.
So it feels perfect. So I'm going to read it, and then we can chat about it. I hope I do a good job. Amazing. Sometimes it takes me a few takes, but usually I'm by myself when I read these, so I can.
Take your time. Take your time.
Okay. Hello, Hayes and Haley. I'm in my mid-20s and recently changed career paths. In the midst of that change, I stopped working in an office for about 8 months and mostly worked from home. I also met my boyfriend, who I love and want to spend the rest of my life with. I recently started a new job back in an office, and it's going really well. I've had bad experiences with bosses in the past, so it's surprising and a little bewildering to be treated so nicely by everyone. My boyfriend is so supportive of my new job. I usually take the bus to work since parking downtown is expensive, but whenever he sleeps over, he gets up early to drive me. But since I'm used to struggling in an office setting, I find myself falling back on a bad habit. When I was in school, I used to develop a crush in each class, just to distract myself from the boredom. Not someone I actually want to date, just someone cute to daydream about. It's been my coping strategy for at least a decade, and I know it isn't the best one, but I hated school and it got me through it. Now I'm daydreaming about a couple of my coworkers that I find attractive, and I feel unsettled by this. I also think about my boyfriend, but he's unavailable by text when he works, and he isn't right in front of me like my coworkers are. I know I'm not really doing anything wrong, and I have no desire to be with anyone except my boyfriend, yet I feel guilty for doing this in my mind. What are your thoughts? How do I turn off the part of my brain that does this? Should I put a picture of my boyfriend on my desk to remind myself? Yours, Dangerous Daydreamer.
I love it. I love that so much. It's amazing.
Where do we begin? What's your I'd love to hear what your kind of initial initial reaction is off the dome.
Well, I think that the most important part of this submission is just the little snippet of self-compassion that we get towards the end. Just like, I know there's nothing really wrong with this. So there's like that wise mind coming out, because I hear this and my instinct is, okay, like, so what, And I think what happens with attraction and also coping mechanisms of fantasy is that when they are tied to shame, that puts a value on them that kind of weighs them. And to me, our thoughts are not our actions. And also what I practice with my my exposure therapy is my thoughts are none of my business. Like, a thought is a thought, and a thought is not an action. So for me, the invitation here is just an overwhelming sense of compassion. I want this this person to offer compassion to themselves, because one, this is tremendously normal. Two, I always say there's nothing better than a crush. A crush is just the best. And I think that fantasy is also just a beautiful, creative part of the mind. And I sort of love that this person's brain is creating a little fantasy world that it's so obvious they're not interested in acting on this. And your boyfriend does not ever have to have access to all parts of your brain, because that's private. That we deserve privacy in our relationships. And I also can see a world where you talk about this, and if he's the great guy that you say that he is, I think that there's probably a lot of potential that he might admit that he has similar coping mechanisms. And I think that it makes sense. Our minds, we love the taboo. We love the things that are dangerous and out of reach. And if this is a lifelong coping mechanism, then there's something kind of sacred about that. And I'm not exactly sure why we have to let that go if it's not hindering our ability to work, if it's not taking away from our relationship and our connection, if the guilt isn't, so supreme that it's eating at us. And so, I'm hopeful that the sort of sharing and will dispel the shame a little bit. But the thing that I always talk about with crushes is what I call the crush of convenience. And this is the perfect example of the COC, the crush of convenience. The crush of convenience is simply a crush that is just enough out of reach, and it's usually a coworker, a roommate, someone who's already in a relationship, or someone that we know is not actually available. Maybe they live in a different country entirely. I mean, there's plenty of examples, because these crushes are safe. And I usually get a lot of submissions about, I'm in love with my roommate, or I can't stop thinking about my boss. Should I do anything about it? Usually my answer is no, don't do anything about it, because I think that the fantasy is going to be far better than the reality and the strife that it inevitably will cause. But this is, to me, a very harmless crush of convenience, because you're very grounded in the value that you love your partner, you want to stay with your partner, at least right now, right? That could change, but that right now you feel that way. So what a fun little crush of convenience. How is this any different than a celebrity that you you totally, you know, have a fantasy about, right? Like, again, as long as it's not interfering with your day-to-day life. I think the thing that's interfering the most is the guilt and the shame. And so if we can dispel the guilt and the shame, it also will probably take the stakes out of the crush and make the crush less exciting, which sometimes can suck, but also can.
Right. If you have to choose crush or shame, like I'll pick I'll pick losing a little bit of the spark of the crush so that I can be less mired in shame.
Exactly. And I think that that's part of being an adult, is sort of stripping romanticizing situations and kind of coming back to the anchor of our values. And yeah, sometimes that makes life a little less shiny, but it also can elevate the things in our life that really are so wonderful and exciting. But anyway, I spoke for a long time.
No,
but I'd love to hear what you think.
I think I'm so glad you spoke for a long time. That's why you're here. And I think I'm right there with you. Like, I'd be really curious, because what I'm interested in is that what I care most about is that she is unsettled. Like, nothing wrong with this, but I care that, or I just gave a gender to this person. I shouldn't do that. I don't know what this person's gender is. They are unsettled.
Don't know.
And
they're unsettled.
I'd be curious to see if looking at this crush with compassion, suddenly looking at the behavior with compassion suddenly makes them no longer feel unsettled, then we have no problem. If, per your point, they continue to feel unsettled, it's impacting work, it's impacting their relationship, they're no longer, something's going on with the partner, then maybe we unpack it more. It could be, if this has been a lifelong habit, it's something I would talk about with my therapist, if I had one. Totally. Which I definitely do.
And we recommend that to everyone listening.
Yes. Therapy is the best. Cool.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you. I all my advice that I give is always written, so it is really fun to be able to like talk through it. That is like, I think, I mean, I know that you also have written responses to advice, but I feel like, you know, the way you blew up on TikTok is that you speak. That I read. Yeah. And I've always been really, or yes, you read it, but you're talking. And I've always been really impressed by that.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. I think you just did such a great job. What I love just listening to you and your response there was like hearing your thought process unfold. And like, I, as a listener and as a listener or a viewer, I really like that. Like, I liked that I could see you thinking. And it's, as I make this podcast, and sometimes I've been experimenting with different formats on this podcast. And coming from TikTok, when my advice column answers are very polished and
right.
scripted, and they're very polished and TikTok-y, I have kind of not been sure about what I want it to sound like. Trying to find that perfect middle ground of like what I want it to be and what will resonate with others. But I've never really, hearing you just talk through an answer in the way that I think I am in the podcast was just like evidence for me. Like, oh, I liked the way that sounded. And I liked watching Haley and listening to Haley kind of talk more casually and like follow the thread in her mind rather than so
having it be perfect. Yeah.
So
totally.
That was fun for me.
That's also so cool that you're playing with different. That's the best thing to do, so that your I don't love the word content, but that your content or your let's call it creations, or your artistry doesn't get stale. Like, that has been a huge part of my journey online, being online for a decade now, is I try to be very conscious when something that I have been doing is starting to feel stale. So I feel like you embarking on a sort of a different approach sometimes to your advice is a really great way to keep that alive for you.
Thank you. It's been hard. Or no, it's been hard. It's been fucking hard. It's been hard.
Yeah.
But I'm being more compassionate with myself as I figure it out, and that has helped.
Yeah. That is the best way to do it. Yeah.
My final question for you. Old Enough, the title.
Yeah.
It's when I read the phrase old enough for the first time in the book, I was like, oh, there it is. And then
there it
came up a couple other times towards the end. And can you give us like the secret? Did you have the title first and then you added those lines in, or did you write them and you loved them? Tell us how it happens.
Yeah, so what's funny is I don't actually think I named my book. Like, I don't know who said it, because I was brainstorming with my friend Jake, who has just been one of the most impactful friends when it has come to my identity as a writer. He's the person who sat me down 2 weeks into our freshman year and said, I think that you're way smarter than the party girl persona that you put on, and I don't know why you do it. And that was a fresh Sagittarius take, and it really sent me for a loop, and I think it changed the trajectory of my life. So I trust him implicitly with my work. And then I was also with my life partner Carter, and we were in the park and we were just brainstorming, throwing out titles, and someone said Old Enough, and I don't know who it was, but I don't think it was me. I really don't. But it and then I just remember expanding on it, this phrase old enough, and to me it means many things. To me it is very disgustingly the thing that men say when they are pursuing a young girl. She's old enough, she looks old enough. That's the sort of insidious form that it takes. And then of course it's an open-ended statement: old enough to change, old enough to set boundaries, old enough to reflect. And then there's probably more than this, but I think the last one that comes to mind for me is the thing that young girls say: when I'm old enough, I can't wait to be old enough to do fill in the blank. If only I were old enough, he would notice me. So for me, it's sort of this chameleon phrase. And it is funny because I will have people say to me, when I saw it finally said in the book, that was so amazing. But a lot of people think it only shows up one time, and it's in there probably 5 times. And so the manuscript was pretty much done by the time that I found the title. So it was there. So it really does that feels like it belongs to me, even though someone else likely said it. It was there. It was sort of in the blueprint of the story. But it's going to be a hard one to beat. I love the title so much.
I love the title so much too, and the moments it shows up in the book are a delight, and you'll do it again in a different way.
Yeah,
because that's what we do.
Will. You're right.
That's what we do.
And thank God we have more to write and more to say.
Haley, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you so much for having me. It was truly an honor.
If you liked this conversation or have enjoyed previous episodes of, just the two of us talking together, please leave a review or go ahead and watch another episode. It's a great way to support, and I appreciate it. If you want to hang out more, you can find me on Instagram at AFHaze and at HelloHaze everywhere else. And you can find Haley at Haley Jakobson. Jakobson is with a K. Again, her advice series on Wednesdays on Instagram is amazing, and highly recommend you follow her and check it out. I'll see you guys next week, and thanks so much for being here. Hope you have a great rest of your week.